I got to ask you, Dave, I've been actually curious because you're out there living in San Francisco. What do you think about Silicon Valley Bank? Do you think that Janet Yellen and company and the crew, do you think they should have bailed out Silicon Valley Bank?
Well, I think what they're trying to do, this is a complicated thing, Gary, because what they're trying to do, which I agree, is they're trying to bail out the depositors, but not the investors. And I think that's an important difference because in the financial crisis of 2008, everybody got bailed out. Nobody was held accountable. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why the Tea Party exists and why there was so much resistance and why the blue collar voters, frankly, started going to the Republican Party because they thought, the Democrats are in charge. No one's being held accountable. So I agree with all that. So they're trying to change that. And also, in all fairness, there's been a lot of talk from the Elizabeth Warrens of the world that if the 2018 change hadn't been put through that required banks of only 50 billion and not 250, banks that were 50 billion instead of 250 billion to have to go through some of the rules, that would have made a difference. It might have made a little bit of a difference, but what caused this was basically bad management and overextension and buying bonds at too low of a rate. And the Fed knew that they had said they were going to raise rates. So I think this is a bad management issue, and I think that it will pass. I don't think we're going to have a crisis, but I do agree with bailing out investors, not shareholders, but I think there should be a limit. They're talking about $5 million. I think that's too high. How about you?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I think it's creating moral hazard because, initially they said, oh, you're not systemically important. And then magically you morph when things are happening. Okay, you are systemically important. Like there's no signaling that's consistent. So I think that that's really problematic. And then when you look at the composition of who the depositors are and who's going to be in the end paying the extra fees to subsidize those depositors, it's basically in many cases a middle class subsidy for rich Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who were parking their cash there. And in some cases, Chinese, it was one of the biggest holders for Chinese cash. So American middle class people bailing out members of the Chinese Communist Party potentially, I think that's problematic. And I think that there was also, you're totally right on the interest rates. And that's, from my perspective, a Joe Biden problem because Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress created the inflation, and then the Federal Reserve, they were already asleep at the wheel even before that all happened. Arguably, they were keeping interest rates too low, and then they were slow to catch up. And so it was all this perfect storm, and nobody's taking responsibility for the inflation. And thankfully, we have a House that's going to stop, hopefully, well, and we agree on that. It's a bipartisan problem on the spending, but I think there are many layers to this too. You're right.
Well, spending is more of a Republican problem. If you look at the percentage of the national debt that accumulated under Republican administrations as opposed to Democratic ones, it's not even close. But putting that aside, I agree. I think there should be a limit. I think $5 million is too high. I think 250,000 is too low. So what is the sweet spot? And it's a little simplistic to say that it was, Chinese people being bailed out. I think, yes, Chinese invest in VCs, but they're still VCs, and I think you need to keep the entrepreneurial spirit going.